Hey guys, it's Mrs. Stokowski. I'm here in our classroom. Some of you have this classroom, room 112. And I'm just here to do a quick chapters 23, 24 Catcher in the Rye video. So we're almost done with Catcher in the Rye. Chapter 23, 24, I'm going to do together. And then I'll do a chapter 24 or 25, 26 video, and then we'll be done. So this video, I'm going to take you through some of the highlights of chapters 23 and 24, but I'm not going to read the entire chapter to you. You do need to read the chapters. You need to know what's going on. We meet a new character. This is our final new character. His name is Mr. Antolini. We have some notes about him. We'll talk about him in class. Some interesting interactions with Mr. Antolini. He is Holden's former English teacher. Holden talks about him in the previous chapters a little bit. He talks about Elkton Hills, the school that he went to. He talks about an incident where a boy named James Castle committed suicide, and it's something that's really like traumatized him, and he remembers. It's one of those scenes that he goes back to, kind of like when Allie died, and it's something that, you know, really filled him with concern and hurt and probably some unhealed wounds himself, having experienced witnessing this event in his school where a boy, James Castle, jumped out of a window and killed himself, and he was wearing a sweater that Holden had lent him. So this is something that Holden remembers, and he talks about Mr. Antolini being a teacher at that school who helped during that scene where James Castle had committed suicide. And so this is something that sort of hangs with Holden and haunts him. And he's stayed connected to this teacher from that school, and he reaches out to him because he needs a place to stay. So that is what is the catalyst. Holden's going to need to leave his house. He's there seeing Phoebe, but he doesn't want his parents to see him yet. So he has to leave and go somewhere else. So he's going to reach out to this English teacher who he had a friendship with from this school, Elkton Hills. So we'll get started there. Hope everybody's doing well. We're so close to done with this book, which is exciting. Start some new things soon. But I do the end chapters of Catcher in the Rye, especially chapter 25 is one of my favorite chapters in this book. It might be my favorite chapter. All right, so with that, here are the notes for 24, 25. Whoops. Sorry, 23, 24. And then there's just some review, some get focused tips if you still need some of those, review of the previous two chapters, and then again, the lessons for chapter 23 and 24. Here's a nice little analysis about the character Mr. Antolini. And also what I think is interesting is this article. There's this article from The Atlantic. Here it is. I posted the link. The Dark Hallways of Horace Mann. Horace Mann is this prep school, this real prep school, not a fictional one like Holden's. And about this, like, there's been some sexual abuse scandals that have gone unchecked at some prestigious private schools, particularly dating back to the 20th century. So this is like Holden was in school in 1950 is when this book takes place. So he talks about a few things in these chapters that may have like raised your eyebrows about, hey, like what's happening at these schools. Holden makes mention, he drops some hints that he's been in uncomfortable situations where he just doesn't even want to talk about what happened. And so this article sort of touches on some scandals that had been notoriously going on at prep schools in the 20th century and shed some light on that. So even though Holden isn't specifically telling us what has happened at these schools, I just thought it was important to raise the awareness that there were some scandals at prep schools involving the students. And this, you know, is something that you might want to be aware of. And so here's an article if you're looking to explore that topic a little bit further. All right, so with that, we have chapters 23 and 24 of Catcher in the Rye. And I've got, oops, I've got my PDF if I can get to it. No, sorry. All right, I will get back to it. My PDF of Catcher in the Rye, of course, is in Schoology. And I'm going to go to page 93 is where I'm going to pick up. So page 93 of my Catcher in the Rye online text. You might have the packet. I think the page numbers are the same if you've been numbering them. And the start of chapter 23, Holden is still with his sister Phoebe. Oops, that's what I wanted. He's still with his sister Phoebe at his parents' house where he's been hanging out. Remember, he talked about the cliff and wanting to be a catcher in the rye and stopping kids from falling off the cliff into their adulthood. And so Phoebe's like, what are you talking about, Holden? That's not a job. And then suddenly, while he's hanging out with Phoebe in chapter 23, again, this is page 93, he decides he's got to get out of there before his parents get home, right? So I'm afraid my parents would barge in, right? They were out. So he makes a snappy phone call to Mr. Antolini, that teacher that I was just mentioning, because he trusts him. They've kept in touch, and he says, this guy will help me out, and he asks if he can come stay there for the night. And Mr. Antolini answers the phone and says, sure. And so Holden has made this plan to go to Mr. Antolini's house from his parents' house. So first he has to say goodbye to Phoebe. So he's still at home. His parents end up coming home, and he hides. So that goes on in chapter 23. Again, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but they do come home and he hides and he doesn't get caught. Mom talks to Phoebe quickly and then, she exits the scene and Holden's able to get out of there. But before he gets out of there, he says goodbye to Phoebe. She's sad to see him go. She's like, oh, just hide here. You can hide with me, just stay the night here. And he's like, no, I'm going to leave. And then he does this one thing. Before he leaves, he asks Phoebe for some money. And I just want to talk about that. That's on page 96. He says he asks her for some money, and this is so sweet. His little sister gives him her Christmas money. So her parents had given Christmas dough, she says. Her parents had given her some Christmas dough so she could buy people presents, and she hadn't done all of her shopping yet, or she says she hasn't done any of it yet. And so here, take my Christmas money. And Holden's like, I don't want to take your Christmas dough. And she's like, that's okay, no big deal. So she hands him this money because Holden has run out of money, he's explained. And it's very sweet. So she gives him the money and he says goodbye. But this is one more thing. And I'll just kind of look at the end of this chapter, chapter 23. This is page 97. I'll read page 97 for this chapter. He's saying goodbye to Phoebe. She's given him some money. And then he says, then all of a sudden I started to cry. I couldn't help it. I did it so nobody could hear me, but I did it. It scared the hell out of old Phoebe when I started doing it. And she came over and tried to make me stop. But once you get started, you can't just stop on a goddamn dime. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed when I did it, and she put her old arm around my neck, and I put my arm around her too, but I still couldn't stop for a long time. I thought I was going to choke to death or something. Boy, I scared the hell out of poor old Phoebe. The damn window was open and everything, and I could feel her shivering and all, because all she had on was her pajamas. I tried to make her get back in bed, but she wouldn't go. Finally, I stopped, but it certainly took me a long, long time. Then I finished buttoning my coat and all. I told her I'd keep in touch with her. She told me I could sleep with her, but I said no, that I'd better beat it, that Mr. Antolini was waiting for me. Then I took my hat out of my hunting hat out of my coat pocket and gave it to her. She likes those kinds of crazy hats. She didn't want to take it, but I made her. I'll bet she slept with it on. She really likes those kinds of hats. Then I told her again I'd give her a buzz if I got a chance, and then I left. It was a hell of a lot easier getting out of the house than it was getting in, for some reason. For one thing, I didn't give much of a damn anymore if they caught me. I really didn't. I figured if they caught me, they'd caught me. I almost wish they did in a way. I walked all the way downstairs instead of taking the elevator. I went down the back stairs and nearly broke my neck on about 10 million garbage pails, but I got all out all right. The elevator boy didn't even see me. He probably still thinks I'm up at the Dixtines. All right, that's the end of chapter 23. So that's really sort of a sweet moment. Holden gives his hat, his treasured hat, the symbol of, you know, his emotions and his protection, to his little sister, right? As like a gesture of protection, right? So he gives his hat to Phoebe and she loves it. And she gives him her Christmas money. So it's such a sweet, tender scene, I think, between two siblings. So I really love this interaction with Phoebe and Holden in chapter 23. So then he leaves and he goes to Mr. Antolini's and Mrs. Antolini's. So he goes over to their apartment. He says they have this swanky apartment. They had been having a party. So they had been up, they had been drinking, they had been hanging out with friends, and Holden gets there and they start to have conversation. And then Mrs. Antolini ends up excusing herself and going to bed. And Mr. Antolini stays up and talks to Holden. They smoke a cigarette together, and then Mr. Antolini had been drinking. So Mr. Antolini is a little bit drunk, which makes it, you know, an interesting conversation. And then he starts asking Holden, this is page 98, about what's going on. And Holden tells him that he flunked out again, and the only thing he passed was English, and they have a conversation. And then if you jump ahead to page 101, after they talk about Holden's, you know, failing out of school and what was going on, Mr. Antolini does what Mr. Spencer did. He starts giving Holden advice. And it's unsolicited advice, but Holden sits there and he listens to it. And this is on page 101. So I'm going to read this passage. He says, "All right, listen to me a minute now. I may not word this as memorably as I'd like to, but I'll write you a letter about it in a day or two. Then you can get it all straight. But listen now anyway." He started concentrating again. Then he said, "This fall I think you're riding for, it's a special kind of fall, a horrible kind. The man falling isn't permitted to feel or hear himself hit bottom. He just keeps falling and falling. The whole arrangement's designed for men who, at some time or other in their lives, were looking for something their own environment couldn't supply them with, or they thought their own environment couldn't supply them with. So they gave up looking. They gave it up before they ever really even got started. You follow me? Yes, sir. Sure? Yes." He got up and poured some more booze in his glass. Then he sat down again. He didn't say anything for a long time. I don't want to scare you," he said, "but I can very clearly see you dying nobly one way or another for some highly unworthy cause." He gave me a funny look. "If I write something down for you, will you read it carefully and keep it?" "Yes, sure," I said. I did too. I still have the paper he gave me. He went over to this desk on the other side of the room and without sitting down wrote something on a piece of paper. Then he came back and sat down with the paper in his hand. Oddly enough, this wasn't written by a practicing poet. It was written by a psychoanalyst named Wilhelm Steckel. Here's what are you still with me? Yes, sure I am. Here's what he said. The mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause, while the mark of a mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. He leaned over and handed it to me. I read it right when he gave it to me, and then I thanked him and all and put it in my pocket. It was nice of him to go to all that trouble, it really was. The thing was, though, I didn't feel much like concentrating. Boy, I felt so damn tired all of a sudden. You could tell he wasn't tired at all, though. He was pretty oiled up, for one thing. All right, I'm going to pause there. This is important advice for Holden. We'll probably do a little journal entry on it, but Mr. Antolini gives Holden advice about what it means to be mature versus immature. It's right here. It's a quote. And so that's something that, you know, we should do a little deeper thinking about. So contemplate that one. We'll contemplate it together in class too. Might make you write something about it as well. But that's this advice Mr. Antolini gives to Holden. It's a pretty famous passage. So then Holden's tired. He's had a very long day. He decides he's going to go to sleep. He's staying on the couch. So he says goodnight to Mr. Antolini. And then Mr. Antolini starts having a conversation with Holden about his women. He's like, how are all your women? This is the bottom of 102. And so Holden's on the couch. He's very tired, and he's starting to answer these questions. Mr. Antolini knew a little bit about Sally Hayes. Holden says, I introduced them, Jane Gallagher. And then they make up the couch, and this is where things get a little bit interesting. After they make up the couch, Holden's lying on the couch, and Mr. Antolini goes into the kitchen. It says he went out into the kitchen. This is page 103. And I went into the bathroom and got undressed and all. I couldn't brush my teeth because I didn't have any toothbrush with me. I didn't have any pajamas either. Mr. Antolini forgot to lend me some. So I just went back in the living room and turned off this little lamp next to the couch. Then I got in bed with just my shorts on. It was way too short for me, the couch, but I really could have slept standing up without batting an eyelash. I laid awake for just a couple of seconds thinking about all that stuff Mr. Antolini told me, about finding out the size of your mind and all. He was really a pretty smart guy, but I couldn't keep my goddamn eyes open, and I fell asleep. Then something happened. I don't even like to talk about it. I woke up all of a sudden. I don't know what time it was or anything, but I woke up. I felt something on my head, some guy's hand. Boy, it really scared the hell out of me. What it was Mr. Antolini's hand. What he was doing, he was sitting on the floor right next to the couch, in the dark and all, and he was sort of petting me or patting me on the goddamn head. Boy, I'll bet I jumped about 1,000 feet. What the hell are you doing? I said. Nothing. I'm simply sitting here admiring. What are you doing anyway? I said over again. I didn't know what the hell to say. I mean, I was so embarrassed as hell. How about keeping your voice down? I'm simply sitting here. I have to go anyway, I said. Boy, was I nervous. I started putting on my damn pants in the dark. I could hardly get them on. I was so damn nervous. I know more damn perverts at school and all than anybody you ever met, and they're always being pretty perverty around me. You have to go where? Mr. Antolini said. He was trying to act very goddamn casual and cool and all, but he wasn't any too goddamn cool. Take my word. I left my bags and all at the station. I think maybe I better go down and get them. I have all my stuff in them. They'll be there in the morning. Now go back to bed. I'm going to bed myself. What's the matter with you? Nothing's the matter. It's just that all my money and stuff's in one of my bags. I'll be right back. I'll get a cab and be right back, I said. Boy, I was falling all over myself in the dark. Thing is, it isn't mine, the money. It's my mother's. And don't be ridiculous, Holden. Get back in that bed. I'm going to bed myself. The money will be there safe and sound in the morning. No kidding. I gotta get going. I really do. I was damn near all dressed already, except that I couldn't find my tie. I couldn't remember where I'd put my tie. Put on my jacket and all without it. Old Mr. Antolini was now sitting in the big chair, a little ways away from me, watching me in the dark and all, and I couldn't see him so hot, but I knew he was watching me all right. He was still boozing, too. I could see his trusty highball glass in his hand. You're a very, very strange boy. I know what I said. I didn't even look around much for my tie, so I went without it. Goodbye, sir, I said. Thanks a lot. No kidding. He kept walking right behind me when I went to the front door, and when I rang the elevator bell, he stayed in the damn doorway. All he said was that business about my being a very, very strange boy again. Strange my ass. Then he waited in the doorway and all till the goddamn elevator came. I never waited so long for an elevator in my whole goddamn life, I swear. I didn't know what the hell to talk about while I was waiting for the elevator, and he kept standing there, so I said, I'm going to start reading some good books. I really am. I mean, you had to say something. It was embarrassing. You grab your bags and scoot right on back here again. I'll leave the door unlatched. Thanks a lot, I said. Goodbye. The elevator was finally there. I got in and went down. Boy, was I shaking like a madman. I was sweating too. When something perverting like that happens, I start sweating like a bastard. That kind of stuff's happened to me about 20 times since I was a kid. I can't stand it. All right, that's the end of chapter 24. That was page 104. So that's the conversation that we need to have, is what is happening. Holden, we'll talk about it in class. Holden feels uncomfortable, and I think that is an important signal in yourself to be aware of. If you're feeling uncomfortable, that is how you're feeling. Regardless of what Mr. Antolini's intentions were, it made Holden feel uncomfortable. That's the whole consent piece, right? Holden did not consent to Mr. Antolini petting his head with his hand. It made him feel very uncomfortable. So we don't know exactly what Mr. Antolini's intentions were beyond that, and Holden wasn't going to stay to find out. So we'll talk about this. I think it's good for Holden to follow his instincts, or anyone in a situation when they feel uncomfortable. And that's what Holden is doing here. And we do learn a little bit more about Holden, where he says that this type of thing has happened to him about, what was it, about 20 times, right, since I was a kid. So we talk about Holden and how he's struggling and he's in crisis mode, and he has a lot of unresolved like conflicts, and he's mentioned things that he probably needs to do some work on when he gets his psychoanalysis, right? We know that he does end up somewhere. He still has a lot of hurt from the death of his brother, Allie, right? That was a very traumatizing experience for Holden. He has some hurt here that he mentions. Well, the other death one too is that James Castle, that boy that he witnessed who killed himself at Elkton Hills. That was traumatizing to Holden. And then this scene too, where we find out, and this is some intimacy stuff that we know Holden's been struggling with, trying to figure out as someone who is approaching adulthood, how to navigate intimacy in his life. And he says that there have been some instances that have made him feel uncomfortable. And so that's something that Holden might need to do some investigation and self-examination. He's got some conflicts and he needs to get some help. And so these are areas that he has suggested to us have come up for him a few times that are unresolved. And I think that it's really good that Holden knows himself well enough to recognize that this is, making him uncomfortable, and this like triggers some unresolved conflicts, some stuff that's happened to him, in his past. And so I think that that's like a really good place, as uncomfortable as Holden is, it is a good place for him to recognize that he needs to do some work, and he might need to talk to somebody, because we do know that he ends up having to go talk to somebody. So these are just some of the ongoing conflicts that Holden's having. Another example here of where Holden's really, it's just not working out for him, and he's finding himself, in a position where he's having a hard time trusting people, and we can maybe understand why. Maybe some things have happened where it's hard for him to put his trust in other people, and he really does need to have some people that he trusts, that he can confide in, who can help him. And that's what we all want, and that's what I do want for this character Holden. I want him to find people that he can trust and that he can confide in, and who can maybe help him, because he does need some help. All right, so with that, we'll be back for the last 2 chapters. We're like just about done, and please keep looking at Schoology for updates. All right, bye.